A billionaire heir is taken aback when he sees two poor little girls selling an old violin. Please, sir, buy it so we can eat. We're starving. Upon noticing the symbol engraved inside, he is shocked. The gentle hum of the Range Rover's engine was just a murmur inside the climate-controlled cabin, where Jack Morrison tried to ignore the barrage of messages his father kept sending non-stop. The car's display read 95 degrees, a particularly hot day even for July in Boston. The air conditioning worked at full capacity, creating a stark contrast to the sweltering heat that made people on the sidewalk move as if in slow motion, seeking shade from the historic buildings. We need to discuss your future in the company immediately. His father's latest message blinked insistently on the phone's screen. Jack sighed, running a hand through his carefully groomed brown hair. At 28, he was already exhausted by the endless expectations that came with the Morrison name. Morrison Real Estate was a powerhouse in New England's real estate market, built over 3 generations of men determined to leave their mark on Boston's skyline. His grandfather had begun with a small office downtown, and his father had turned that modest start into an empire worth billions of dollars. Now, everyone expected Jack to follow in the same footsteps, expanding the family legacy even further. The problem was that Jack never truly felt part of that world of ruthless negotiations and interminable business dinners. Since childhood, something inside him had yearned for something else, something more meaningful. But these weren't thoughts a Morrison was supposed to have, as his father constantly reminded him. The traffic light turned red, and Jack braked gently, his fingers drumming on the Italian leather steering wheel. That was when something unusual caught his attention through the tinted window. On the sidewalk in front of an old musical instrument store, 2 little girls stood out in the urban landscape like delicate flowers amid concrete. The older one, who couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, had red hair braided messily over her right shoulder. She wore a light blue dress that, although clean, clearly showed signs of excessive wear. In her small hands, she held what looked like an old violin, cradling it with an almost reverential care. Next to her, even smaller, was a girl who couldn't have been more than 4. Her light blonde hair was tied into 2 uneven pigtails, and she clutched a brown teddy bear that had seen better days. Her pink dress had water stains, as if it had recently been hand-washed and not fully dried. What drew Jack's attention most was the expression on the girls' faces. There was a mix of desperation and determination in their eyes that seemed completely out of place for children so young. The younger one especially seemed to be fighting back tears, her lower lip trembling as she watched pedestrians pass by, most of them not even noticing her. The light turned green, but Jack didn't move. Something about that scene disturbed him deeply. Where were these children's parents? Why were they alone on the street, holding a violin that was clearly too valuable to be in such tiny hands? Ignoring the impatient horn blaring from the car behind him, Jack signaled and pulled over to the curb. His father always said that getting involved with strangers on the street was asking for trouble, but there was something about those 2 small figures that kept him from simply driving away. "Hey, you two," he called, getting out of the car and approaching cautiously so as not to scare them. "Where are your parents?" The older girl took a step forward, instinctively positioning herself between Jack and her younger sister. Her big, expressive green eyes sized him up with a surprising level of maturity for someone so young. "Please, sir," her voice was surprisingly steady, though her fingers tightened their grip on the violin. "Could you buy our violin? We haven't eaten anything since yesterday, and we're really hungry." As if to confirm her words, the younger girl's stomach rumbled audibly, making her bury her face in the teddy bear in embarrassment. Jack felt his heart constrict. The girl's words carried a kind of desperation no child should ever know. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, noticing how their fair skin was beginning to redden under the merciless sun. "Since the store opened," the older girl replied, casting a worried glance at her sister. "The lady in the store said old violins aren't worth much, but," her voice faltered for the first time, "we really need money for food." That was when Jack noticed something on the violin that made his heart skip a beat. Engraved in the dark, time-worn wood, almost imperceptible from age, was a small compass rose symbol. The same symbol he had seen hundreds of times during his music lessons 20 years ago. The memory hit him like a wave. No, 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 dear. You're holding it as if the violin might attack you any second. Mrs. Betty Williams's voice had that tone of patient amusement she always used whenever Jack made a basic mistake. A violin is an extension of your body, not a foreign object. Here, watch. Jack, then 8 years old, watched in fascination as his teacher demonstrated the correct posture. Mrs. Williams was different from all the other tutors his parents had hired. She didn't have that excessive deference to the Morrison name, nor the formal stiffness that marked the etiquette and public speaking lessons he was forced to attend. In her music room, with walls covered in framed sheet music and the permanent scent of chamomile tea in the air, Jack could just be a boy learning to make music. Mrs. Williams had a special way of making every mistake feel like just a necessary step in the learning process, not the unforgivable failure his father made him feel. "See this mark here?" she had asked one day, showing him the compass rose engraved in her violin. "This instrument belonged to my grandmother. She used to say that music is like a compass. It can guide us through any storm in life." Jack had touched the mark reverently, feeling the small ridges in the wood beneath his fingers. "Is that why you never play another violin?" "Exactly, dear. Some instruments carry more than just music. They carry stories, memories, love. This violin..." She had smiled, her eyes shining with something the 8-year-old Jack couldn't fully understand. "This violin is part of my story." The voice of the younger girl brought him back to the present. "Please, sir, we're really hungry." Her blue eyes, identical to Mrs. Williams's, were brimming with tears. "This violin," Jack began, his voice trembling slightly as he crouched down to the girl's level. "Your grandmother. Is her name Betty Williams?" The two girls exchanged surprised looks. "You know our grandma?" asked the older one, a spark of hope lighting up her eyes. "She was my music teacher when I was about your age," Jack replied, taking out his phone. After a few moments searching through his gallery, he found what he was looking for. An old photo, digitized, showing a 12-year-old Jack smiling beside Mrs. Williams after his first public performance. "That's Grandma!" the younger girl exclaimed, her eyes widening as she recognized the figure in the photo. "Look, Emily, it's her." "Sarah, don't get too close," the older one, Emily, warned, still cautious despite the apparent connection with her grandmother. A wave of conflicting emotions hit Jack. How had he allowed so many years to go by? How had Mrs. Williams, who had taught him so much about music and life, ended up in a situation where her granddaughters had to sell her precious violin just to eat? "How long has it been since you had a proper meal?" he asked, already getting to his feet and looking around for a place where he could feed them. "Yesterday morning, Mrs. Martinez brought us some bread," Emily said softly, lowering her voice. "But Grandma hasn't eaten in 2 days. She says she's not hungry, but she's saving whatever little she has for you," Jack finished, feeling his heart clench. It was exactly the sort of thing Mrs. Williams would do, always putting others first. Sarah sniffled, holding the teddy bear tighter against her chest. "Grandma cries at night when she thinks we're sleeping, and she can't give lessons anymore because she's so weak." Jack looked at the violin in Emily's hands, that instrument that had borne witness to so many hours of learning and growth in his own life. The idea that Mrs. Williams's granddaughters were being forced to sell it to meet basic survival needs made him feel ashamed of all the luxury surrounding him. "Come with me," he said firmly. "First, we'll get something to eat, then you'll take me to your grandma. This violin, it's worth a lot more than you realize, and I'm not about to let you sell it like this." The girls hesitated, years of warnings about not trusting strangers obviously weighing on their young minds. Jack could practically hear Mrs. Williams's voice, cautioning them about the dangers of the world. "Look, I know your grandma told you not to trust strangers, and she's absolutely right," he said, pointing to a family-friendly restaurant across the street. "So here's what we'll do. You two stay near the door, where everyone can see you, while I order the food. Then you show me the way to your house on foot, and I'll follow in my car. Mrs. Martinez can confirm who I am when we get there." Emily and Sarah exchanged looks, having one of those silent conversations only sisters can have. Another growl from someone's empty stomach seemed to make the decision for them. "Promise you won't try to take Grandma's violin?" Emily asked, her green eyes fixed on Jack's with surprising intensity. "I promise," he replied solemnly. "Actually, I promise more than that. I'm going to help you and your grandma, Mrs. Williams." He hesitated, feeling the weight of years of negligence. "She means more to me than you can imagine." As he guided the girls across the street toward the restaurant, Jack couldn't help but notice how they carried themselves with impressive dignity despite all their adversity. Emily still held the violin with that reverential care, and Sarah, although clearly exhausted and hungry, walked with her head held high. His phone vibrated once more in his pocket, probably his father again, impatient for his lack of response. But for the first time in a long time, Morrison family expectations seemed completely irrelevant. The violin in Emily's hands, with its compass rose engraving on the aged wood, seemed to pulse with the memories of countless important lessons he'd forgotten over the years. "Music guides us through any storm," he murmured to himself, repeating Mrs. Williams's words as he watched the two small figures walking ahead of him. In his heart, Jack knew he was about to embark on a journey that would forever change not only his life, but the lives of everyone involved. What he didn't yet realize was that this casual encounter on a hot July afternoon would be only the first chapter of a much larger story about to unfold. A story of second chances, redemption, and the transformative power of love and music. The Italian restaurant on the corner of Charles Street was nearly empty at that hour. The scent of fresh basil and tomato sauce hung in the air as Emily and Sarah devoured their plates of spaghetti as though each bite might be their last meal ever. Jack watched them with a mixture of compassion and guilt, wondering how many other meals they might have missed in recent weeks. "You can eat more slowly," he said gently, noticing Sarah nearly choke on a piece of bread. "I'm not going to take your plates away, I promise." Emily set her fork down for a moment, blushing slightly. Her grandmother's violin rested carefully beside her on the seat, guarded like a treasure. "Sorry, Mr. Morrison. It's just been so long." "Just call me Jack," he interrupted kindly. "And you don't need to apologize. I just don't want you to feel sick." Gesturing to the waitress, he added, "Actually, I'm going to order some things for you to take home. Your grandma needs to eat too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Grandma will be so happy. She always says she's not hungry, but we hear her stomach growling at night." Jack felt his heart tighten. Opening his wallet, he took out several green bills. "Emily," he said, placing the money on the table, "here's $50,000 for the violin." The girl's eyes widened. Emily dropped her fork, which clanged against the plate. $550,000, she stammered. "But the lady in the store said it was too old, that it wasn't worth—" "That lady was trying to cheat you," Jack explained, feeling a flash of anger at the memory. "This violin is very special. It's an authentic 18th century Stradivarius. But more importantly," he smiled softly, "it's been in your family for generations. It has a sentimental value that can't be measured." Sarah looked at her sister with concern. "But Grandma loves this violin so much, and that's why it's going back to her," Jack assured. "I'm only buying it so that you'll have money for food and medicine. The violin will still be yours." Emily frowned, confused. "But if you're giving it back, why pay so much?" Jack leaned back in his chair, remembering all the times Mrs. Williams had been more than just a teacher to him. "Because your grandma taught me so much more than music. She taught me about integrity, about following my heart, lessons I unfortunately took far too long to truly understand." Leaning forward, he continued, "Now, tell me more about yourselves. How long have you been living with your grandma?" A heavy silence fell over the table. Emily took Sarah's hand, who began crying softly. "1.5 years," Emily finally answered, her voice trembling slightly. "After the accident." "What accident?" Jack asked gently, though his heart already knew the answer. "Mom and Dad. They—" Emily swallowed hard, tightening her hold on her sister's hand. "It was a rainy day. They were coming back from a performance. Dad played cello in the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and Mom was the first violinist." "The car skidded," Sarah whispered, tears rolling down her chubby cheeks. "Grandma says they became angels." Jack felt his own eyes sting. Now he understood why he hadn't heard from Mrs. Williams in years. She'd been busy being the only safe harbor for her orphaned granddaughters. Grandma sold her apartment in Cambridge to pay the hospital bills, Emily continued. They tried to save Mom, but her voice failed. She went to meet Dad in heaven, Sarah finished, hugging her teddy bear tightly. Jack took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions under control. And you've been living with your grandma ever since? Emily nodded. She's the best grandma in the world. Even when there's not enough food, she always tells us bedtime stories, and she tried to keep giving music lessons at home, but she got really tired, Sarah interrupted. Sometimes she falls asleep in the middle of the day and wakes up coughing a lot. Jack signaled the waitress again, ordering several meals to go. While they waited, he watched the two girls finish their lunch, their hearts visibly lighter now that they had a full stomach and money to help their grandmother. "Where do you live?" he asked when the waitress brought the bags of food. "On Beacon Hill," Emily answered, carefully putting the money into an inside pocket of her dress. "It's not far from here." They left the restaurant, the girls carrying the bags of food, while Jack held the violin. The afternoon sun was still intense, but now there was a gentle breeze blowing in from the Charles River. "Grandma's going to be mad we left by ourselves," Sarah mumbled as they walked. "She always says it's dangerous." "But we didn't have a choice," Emily argued. "Mrs. Martinez had to go to work, and Grandma could barely get out of bed today." They turned onto a side street lined with old Victorian houses. Jack knew the area well. Morrison Real Estate had renovated several properties there, but he never imagined his former teacher was living in one of the few buildings that hadn't been refurbished. The girls stopped in front of a 3-story building that had seen better days. The blue paint was peeling, and several steps leading up to the entrance were in need of repair. "We're on the 2nd floor," Emily explained, taking a key that was tied around her neck. "Mrs. Martinez lives below us, and the 3rd floor is empty because the roof leaks." Jack felt a new wave of guilt. His company owned dozens of vacant properties throughout Boston, all in perfect condition, while Mrs. Williams and her granddaughters lived in these precarious circumstances. They climbed the stairs in silence, the old wooden boards creaking beneath their feet. On the 2nd floor landing, Emily unlocked a door labeled 2B with crooked numbers. "Grandma," she called softly, stepping inside. "We brought food." The apartment was small, but impeccably clean. Old sheet music decorated the walls, and a worn, upright piano took up most of one side of the living room. The air smelled of chamomile tea, the same scent Jack remembered from his childhood lessons. "Emily, Sarah," a weak voice came from the bedroom. "Where were you? I've been so worried." Jack felt his heart skip a beat at hearing that voice, more fragile than he remembered, but still carrying that kindness that had marked his childhood. "Grandma, look who we found." Sarah ran excitedly to the bedroom. "And we brought food." Jack paused at the bedroom door, the violin trembling slightly in his hands. Mrs. Williams was sitting on a narrow bed, propped up against several pillows. Her hair, once a vibrant brown, was now completely white and much thinner. Her face was pale and thinner than he remembered, but her blue eyes, Sarah's eyes, still shone with that special light. "Jack," she whispered, her eyes widening in recognition. "Jack Morrison?" "Hello, Mrs. Williams," he replied, his voice husky. "Sorry it took me so long to visit." The girls started pulling out food containers from the bags, setting them on a small table beside the bed. Mrs. Williams, however, did not take her eyes off Jack or the violin in his hands. "My little ones tried to sell my violin, didn't they?" she asked softly, not a hint of accusation in her voice. "They just wanted to help, Grandma," Emily quickly explained. "And Jack paid $50,000 for it. Now we can buy your medicine." And $50,000, Mrs. Williams interrupted, shocked. "Jack, that's—" "The least I could do," he finished, moving closer to her bed and offering the violin. "This instrument belongs to your family." I just want to help." Mrs. Williams touched the violin with trembling fingers, tracing the compass rose engraved in the wood. A new coughing fit shook her, and Jack watched in alarm as she struggled to catch her breath. "Grandma!" Emily ran to get a glass of water, while Sarah climbed onto the bed to hold her grandmother's hand. "I'm fine, dears," Mrs. Williams managed to say after a few moments. I just need to rest a little. Jack pulled a chair close to the bed, determined. Mrs. Williams, we need to talk about your health. Emily and Sarah told me about your cough, about how exhausted you've been. The worries of two frightened children. She tried to smile, but it was spoiled by another dry cough. It's nothing serious. Mrs. Martinez said you need exams. Sarah cut in, her blue eyes full of concern. I heard her talking. And expensive medicine, Emily added, bringing the glass of water. That's why we wanted to sell the violin. Mrs. Williams drank a few sips, her hands trembling slightly. You shouldn't have to worry about these things, she murmured, stroking Sarah's hair. And now you won't have to, Jack declared firmly. Mrs. Williams, tomorrow I'm booking appointments with the best doctors in Boston. No discussion, he added when she tried to protest. You took care of me for years, taught me lessons that go far beyond music. Now it's my turn to give back. Jack, she began, but was cut off by another bout of coughing. When she managed to speak again, her voice was weaker. You have your own life, your responsibilities. None of them are more important than this, he insisted. Please, let me help. If not for you, then for the girls. Mrs. Williams looked at her granddaughters, Emily arranging the food on plates, Sarah still clutching her hand tightly. Tears filled her eyes. They are all I have left, she whispered. After Margaret and John. Her voice broke. I know, Jack said gently. Emily told me about the accident. I'm so sorry. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the clinking of utensils as Emily prepared the plates. Jack saw how Mrs. Williams seemed to struggle to keep her eyes open, fatigue evident in every line of her face. You need to eat, and then rest, he said, standing up to help Emily with the plates. We can talk more tomorrow. And don't worry, he added, seeing the concern in her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here when you wake up. Mrs. Williams offered a faint smile, allowing the girls to help her settle more comfortably. You were always special, Jack Morrison, she murmured. I could see beyond that surname from the start. Jack sat down again, watching as Emily and Sarah helped their grandmother with dinner. His phone vibrated insistently in his pocket, likely his father, furious that he'd missed the afternoon meeting. But for the first time in years, the Morrison expectations felt insignificant compared to what truly mattered. The violin with the compass rose rested gently on the dresser, its graceful curves catching the last rays of sun that filtered through the window. Somehow, that instrument had guided Jack back home, not the Morrison mansion in Beacon Hill, but this small apartment where love and music were worth more than any fortune. Night fell over Boston, and with it came new promises. Jack knew the conversation the next day would be difficult. Mrs. Williams would have to be honest about her condition, her worries, her fears. But for now, watching 3 generations of strong women share a simple meal, he allowed himself a sense of hope. Music really could guide us through any storm, and this, Jack silently vowed, would be a storm they would face together. Night had fallen over Boston, enveloping the small apartment in soft shadows. Emily and Sarah had finally drifted off to sleep on the living room couch, exhausted by the long day of emotions. Jack covered them with a blanket he found in the closet, smiling at how Sarah still clutched her teddy bear tightly, even in sleep. Back in the bedroom, he found Mrs. Williams more alert after having eaten properly for the first time in days. She was propped up against the pillows, the violin in her lap, her fingers gently stroking the aged wood. They're amazing, aren't they? She murmured, gazing toward the living room where her granddaughters slept. So young and already so strong, just like their grandmother, Jack replied, sitting in the chair beside the bed. Mrs. Williams, we need to talk, and this time, I want the whole truth. She sighed, a tired sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Always so direct, Jack. Some things never change. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw again the strong teacher who had shaped his childhood. Where do you want to start? From the beginning, he said softly. What happened after I stopped taking lessons? How did we end up here? Mrs. Williams fell silent for a moment, her fingers still tracing the compass rose on the violin. Life went on as it always does. I taught other students, none as stubborn as you, she smiled briefly. Margaret, my daughter, married John. He was a wonderful cellist. They built careers together in the Boston Symphony. Emily was born first, then Sarah. They were the perfect family. Her voice faltered, and Jack noticed how her hands trembled slightly. I had a good apartment in Cambridge, near the conservatory where I taught. The girls visited me every weekend. Margaret was always trying to convince me to retire, saying I had worked enough. But how do you explain that music isn't just work for me? It's life. A dry cough interrupted her, and Jack quickly offered her the glass of water. After a few sips, she continued. Then came that rainy night. Margaret and John were returning from a performance. The roads were slippery. Emily told me about the accident, Jack said gently. John died instantly, Mrs. Williams whispered, silent tears coursing down her face. Margaret, I fought for 3 weeks in the hospital. I sold everything I had, my apartment, my savings, even some rare sheet music I'd collected over the years. But it wasn't enough. Why didn't you ask for help? Jack asked, his voice tight. I would have... Oh, dear, she smiled sadly. You had your own life. And after Margaret, she took a deep breath. The girls needed stability. I managed to rent this apartment, started giving lessons at home for a while. It worked. Until you got sick, Jack finished. How long have you known? Mrs. Williams closed her eyes. The first diagnosis was 6 months ago. Lung cancer, already advanced. The doctors wanted to start treatment right away, but she gave a bitter laugh. Health insurance isn't exactly a priority when you can barely afford food. Jack felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. How long? Without treatment. 3 months, maybe less, she replied with a calmness that frightened him. That's why the girls were so desperate today. They overheard my conversation with Mrs. Martinez last night. As if summoned by the mention of her name, a new coughing fit seized Mrs. Williams, more violent than the earlier ones. Jack watched in horror as she struggled to breathe, dark spots of blood appearing on the handkerchief she pressed to her mouth. That's it, he declared, grabbing his phone. I'm calling an ambulance right now. No, she gripped his arm with surprising strength. The girls, I can't leave them alone. They won't be alone, Jack promised. I'll take care of them while you're in the hospital. Jack, Mrs. Williams began, but he cut her off. You taught me more than music, remember? You taught me about courage, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. Well, this is the right thing now. I'll pay for the best treatment, the best doctors. The sound of his phone ringing interrupted him. His father again. This time, Jack answered. Where on earth are you? Richard Morrison's voice boomed through the phone. You missed the most important meeting of the year. The investors. Dad, Jack cut him off, his voice firm. I'm with Mrs. Williams, my old music teacher. The one who wasted years of your time with those ridiculous lessons. What? She's dying, Jack said simply. Cancer. And I'm using my trust fund to pay for her treatment. The silence on the other end was deafening. When Richard spoke again, his voice was dangerously controlled. Have you lost your mind? That money is for strategic investments, not for saving the life of someone who means more to me than any business deal. Yes, that's exactly what I'm using it for. Jack Morrison, if you do this, what, you'll disinherit me? Jack gave a humorless laugh. Fine. At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror knowing I did the right thing. He hung up, his hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Williams watched him with a mixture of horror and admiration. Jack, no. You can't sacrifice your inheritance for me. I'm not sacrificing anything, he said, already dialing another number. I'm finally honoring everything you taught me. When someone picked up on the other end, he continued, Dr. Peterson, it's Jack Morrison. I need a private ambulance right away and prepare the best suite in the hospital. Yes, it's an emergency. While he made arrangements, Mrs. Williams looked over at her granddaughters sleeping in the living room. What about them? She asked softly. I can't leave them. I told you I'll take care of them, Jack promised. I have a vacant apartment in the building next to the hospital. We can move there tomorrow so they can visit you every day. And once you get better... If I get better, she corrected gently. When, Jack insisted. When you get better, we'll find a better place for all of you to live. Somewhere with a proper music studio so you can teach again if you want. Mrs. Williams smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "You've really grown up, Jack Morrison. Your parents might not see it, but I see the wonderful man you've become." The sound of approaching sirens drifted in through the window. Jack got up and went into the living room, where Emily and Sarah were beginning to stir, awakened by the noise. "Jack," Emily mumbled sleepily. "What's happening?" He knelt beside the sofa, his heart aching at the fear he saw in the girl's eyes. "Your grandma needs to go to the hospital," he explained gently, "but don't worry, she's going to get the best treatment possible. And you two will stay with me while she's there." "No," Sarah cried, tears already streaming down her face. "I don't want to be away from Grandma." "And you won't," he promised. "We're moving to an apartment really close to the hospital. You can visit her every day, I promise." Emily, always more pragmatic, held her sister's hand. "It's because of her cough, isn't it? Is Grandma going to be okay?" Jack looked into her eyes, seeing the same strength he saw in Mrs. Williams. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure of that. But now I need you two to be very brave, all right? I'll help your grandma get ready for the hospital, and then we—" "No," Emily interrupted, standing up. "We'll help. We always help Grandma." He nodded, respecting the girl's resolve. Together, they returned to the bedroom, where Mrs. Williams was already trying to stand. "My little ones," she called, opening her arms. The girls ran to hug her, and for a moment, Jack saw the full extent of the love that bound this small family together. "Grandma will have to stay in the hospital for a while," Mrs. Williams explained, kissing each granddaughter on the forehead. "But Jack will take good care of you, I'm sure, and you'll be able to visit me all the time. Promise you won't leave us like Mommy and Daddy did," Sarah sobbed. Mrs. Williams closed her eyes for a moment, tears escaping beneath her lashes. "I promise I'll fight with all my strength to stay with you, my loves." The medical team arrived minutes later, efficient and discreet. While they helped Mrs. Williams get ready for transport, Jack packed a small bag of clothes and personal items Emily pointed out. "The violin," Mrs. Williams called as she lay on the stretcher. "Jack, please." He understood immediately, taking the instrument and gently placing it in its case. "I'll bring it to the hospital tomorrow," he promised, along with the girls. On the way to the ambulance, his eyes met those of Mrs. Martinez, who had come upstairs to see what was happening. "Take good care of them," the neighbor pleaded, tears in her eyes. "With my life," Jack promised. As the ambulance drove off into the night, its sirens silent at Mrs. Williams's request so as not to frighten the girls further, Jack felt the full weight of his promises. His father would surely try to stop him from using the trust fund. The family's lawyers were probably already being called, and there was the matter of the girls' guardianship to resolve. But looking at Emily and Sarah, who watched the ambulance disappear around the corner, their small hands clasped together, he knew he would do it all over again. Mrs. Williams had taught him that some things were more important than money or status. Family, love, music. "Come on," he said softly, holding the violin in one hand and extending the other to the girls. "It's getting cold out here." Emily hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. "Jack?" she asked in a small voice. "Is Grandma going to die?" He knelt on the sidewalk, looking into the eyes of both girls. "Not if I can help it," he promised. "Your grandma is strong, and now she has something very important to live for, you two, and I promise I'll do everything in my power to help her." Sarah let go of her sister's hand to hug him suddenly. Emily soon followed, and Jack found himself wrapping both of them in his arms, feeling their small tears soak his shirt. "We're a family now," Sarah whispered against his chest. "Aren't we?" Jack felt his heart swell with a love he had never experienced before. "Yes," he answered, his voice tight with emotion. "We are a family." The violin with the compass rose lay in its case, silent but present, as a witness to the promise being made there on the sidewalk. Music really could guide us through any storm, Jack thought, and this would be a storm they would face together as a family. His phone vibrated again in his pocket, probably more threats from his father. But for the first time in his life, Jack Morrison felt no fear of the future. He had found something more valuable than any inheritance, a purpose. The apartment near Massachusetts General Hospital had turned into a small sanctuary in the last few days. Jack leaned against the living room doorway, watching Emily hold her grandmother's violin reverently, as she tried to play the notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Sarah sat on the floor, hugging her trusty teddy bear, her blue eyes locked on her sister with admiration. "Almost," Jack encouraged when Emily missed a note. "Remember what your grandma always says. Music is like a story. Each note is a word, and we need to give each one the time to shine." Emily smiled, adjusting her hold on the violin. It was impressive how, in just 2 weeks, she was already showing so much natural talent. "Grandma was so happy when I played for her yesterday," she said, restarting the melody. "Did you see how her eyes lit up?" Sarah added, swaying to the rhythm. "It was the first time she really smiled since she went to the hospital." Jack felt his heart tighten. The latest round of Mrs. Williams's tests hadn't brought good news. The cancer was spreading faster than expected despite the aggressive treatment. But he refused to give up, and more importantly, he refused to let the girls lose hope. "Sarah," he called, sitting at the piano he'd had installed in the apartment, "why don't we show your sister that piece we've been practicing?" The little one's eyes sparkled. She ran to the piano, sitting next to Jack on the bench. Her tiny hands found the keys with surprising precision for a 4-year-old. 1, 2, 3. Jack counted softly, and together they began playing a simplified version of Für Elise. Sarah still missed some notes, but her enthusiasm made up for any inaccuracies. Emily lowered her violin, watching her sister proudly. "Mom used to play that," she said softly. "Grandma says she played it to help us fall asleep when we were babies." Jack noticed Sarah's lips tighten slightly at the mention of her mother, her fingers hesitating on the piano keys for a moment. It was in those small gestures that he saw how much the girls still grieved, even as they tried to be strong. "Hey," he called gently, pausing the music. "What do you say we go visit your grandma now? We can bring the instruments and give her a little concert." "Can I take the drawings I made?" Sarah asked, already jumping off the bench. "Of course you can, little one. I'm sure your grandma will love them." While the girls ran off to their rooms to get ready, Jack checked his phone messages. 15 missed calls from his father in the last 2 hours. Ever since he'd used part of his trust fund to pay for Mrs. Williams's treatment, Richard Morrison had been on a crusade to bring his son to his senses. "Jack," Emily's voice pulled him back to the present. She stood in her bedroom doorway, holding the violin case. Do you think Grandma is going to get better?" His heart clenched. Emily had always been the more perceptive of the two, picking up on the doctor's expressions and whispered conversations in the hospital corridors. "Come here," he said, sitting down on the couch. Emily approached, and he pulled her onto his lap, something she had only recently begun to allow. "Your grandma is fighting with all her strength, and we're doing everything we can to help. But the most important thing is that, no matter what happens, you and Sarah will never be alone. Understand?" She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "You promise you won't leave us even if Grandma—" "Hey, look at me," he asked softly. When their eyes met, Jack saw all the fear and uncertainty she tried to hide from her younger sister. "I promise with all my heart that I'll always be here for you. We're a family now, remember?" "A family," she repeated, a small smile appearing on her lips. "I'm ready," Sarah announced, bounding into the living room with a folder full of drawings. She stopped when she saw her sister in Jack's lap. "I want a hug too." Soon Jack had both girls in his arms, his heart overflowing with love for these little souls who had come into his life so unexpectedly. The trip to the hospital was short, but always filled with lively chatter. Sarah talked about the pictures she'd drawn, mostly of her grandmother playing the violin, surrounded by hearts and flowers. Emily mentally rehearsed the songs she wanted to play, her fingers moving in the air as though holding the violin. In the hospital room, they found Mrs. Williams paler than usual, though her eyes still lit up at the sight of her granddaughters. "My little melodies," she smiled, extending her arms. "Grandma." Sarah ran to hug her, her drawings fluttering. "Look what I made for you." "And I learned a new piece," Emily announced, already removing the violin from its case. Jack helped Mrs. Williams sit up more comfortably, noting how each movement seemed to cause her pain, even though she tried to hide it. "Jack," she whispered while the girls arranged themselves for their mini-concert, "we need to talk Maz about the future." "Not now," he replied gently. "Let's enjoy the music first." Emily began playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, each note executed carefully. Mrs. Williams's eyes filled with tears. "She has her mother's gift," she whispered. "And Sarah, the same passion for piano that John had." The little concert lasted almost an hour. Sarah showed all her drawings, explaining each detail with the excitement typical of her age. Emily played every piece she had learned, proud of her progress. But Jack noticed Mrs. Williams growing more tired, her breathing more labored. When a nurse came to check her vitals, he knew it was time to go. "But I haven't shown her my last drawing," Sarah protested. "We can come back first thing tomorrow," Jack promised. "Your grandma needs to rest now." Mrs. Williams kissed her granddaughters, holding them a bit more tightly than usual. "My little stars," she murmured. "How you shine." On the drive back to the apartment, Jack noticed Emily was unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" he asked when Sarah fell asleep in the back seat. "Grandma's worse, isn't she?" Emily asked in a small voice. "I saw how the nurse looked at the machines." Jack took a deep breath. "Your grandma is very sick, yes, but that doesn't mean we're giving up. And more importantly," he took her small hand, "it doesn't mean you have to carry this burden alone. Okay?" Emily squeezed his hand, nodding silently. When they arrived at the apartment, she helped carry Sarah, who didn't wake up even when placed in bed. "Jack," Emily called when he was leaving the room, "thank you for everything." His heart swelled with love. "That's what families do," he answered simply. Later, after the girls were asleep, Jack sat at the piano, playing softly so as not to wake them. His phone vibrated again, another message from his father, probably another threat or ultimatum. Tomorrow, he thought, he would have to face Richard Morrison and his demands. He would have to defend his choice to prioritize his new family over the Morrison empire. It would be a tough battle, but looking at Sarah's drawings scattered across the table, hearing Emily's soft breathing through the half-open bedroom door, Jack knew it would be worth it. Music really had guided him through the storm, bringing him to where he had always needed to be. The violin with the compass rose rested in its case, silent but present as always, like a promise that, no matter what happened, music and love would find a way. Morning arrived with the sound of rain softly tapping against the apartment windows. Jack was in the kitchen, making breakfast for the girls, hence when the doorbell rang. He already knew who it was before opening it. His father was never the kind to wait for an invitation. Richard Morrison entered like a storm contained, his immaculate Italian suit clashing with the apartment's warm simplicity. His cold gaze swept the room, pausing at Sarah's drawings on the fridge and the violin resting on the piano. "So this is where the Morrison heir has been hiding?" His voice dripped disapproval. "Playing house while you throw your future away." "Good morning to you too, Dad," Jack replied, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the girls. "Want some coffee?" "I'm not here to socialize, John." The use of his formal name was a clear sign of displeasure. "I'm here to end this madness before you destroy everything our family has built." Jack took a deep breath, pouring coffee for himself. "If you're talking about the treatment money, 50,000 for the violin, 300,000 for the initial treatment, another 200,000 for exams and medication," Richard interrupted, pulling a paper from his inside pocket. "And now this, a meeting with one of Boston's most expensive family attorneys. You seriously intend to file for these children's guardianship? How did you—" "I'm Richard Morrison. Nothing happens in this city without me knowing." He threw the paper on the table. "What are you trying to prove, John? That you can be a rebel? That you can defy everything I've taught you?" "I'm not trying to prove anything," Jack replied, his voice steady. "I'm doing what's right. Mrs. Williams needs—" "Mrs. Williams," Richard let out a humorless laugh. "Your old music teacher. The woman who wasted 5 years trying to turn my son into a mediocre musician instead of preparing him for his real duties. Don't talk about her like that." Jack's voice took on a warning tone. "You don't know anything about her or what she means to me." "I know she's dying," Richard stated coldly. "And in some moment of insanity, you decided it would be a good idea to take responsibility for her orphaned granddaughters. Did you stop to think about the implications, the responsibility of raising 2 children?" "Actually, I've thought a lot about it." Jack placed his cup on the table with more force than necessary. I've thought about how these girls lost their parents in a terrible accident, about how their grandma sold everything she had to try to save them, about how they were starving when I found them. And that makes you, a single 28-year-old man with zero parenting experience, the best option to raise them. Richard arched an eyebrow. Be realistic, John. There are proper families who could adopt them. Families with experience, with structure. Jack, the small voice made both men turn. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, still in pajamas, her green eyes flicking between Jack and the imposing stranger in the expensive suit. Hey, sweetheart, Jack smiled, extending a hand to her. It's okay. This is my father. Emily approached hesitantly, her small hand finding Jack's. Richard observed the interaction with an unreadable expression. Good morning, sir, she said politely, just as Mrs. Williams had taught. Richard gave a brief nod. Where's your sister? Sarah's still asleep, Emily replied, lowering her voice. She was up late last night, worried about Grandma. Jack felt a pang in his chest. The previous evening, Mrs. Williams had had a particularly rough coughing spell, scaring the girls. Emily, he said softly, why don't you go wake your sister? We need to get ready to visit your grandma. She hesitated, glancing back at Richard. Will you still be here when we come back? The question carried a weight that made even Richard Morrison look uncomfortable. Yes, sweetheart, Jack assured her. I'm not going anywhere. After Emily left, Richard turned to his son. Don't you see? They're already dependent on you. And when you inevitably fail to be what they need— I'm not going to fail, Jack interrupted. Know why? Because, contrary to what you think, being a father isn't about business success or keeping up appearances. It's about love, dedication, being present. How dare you? Richard took a step forward, his voice shaking with anger. Everything I did, every decision I made, was for your future. No, Dad, it was for the Morrison future, which isn't necessarily the same thing. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. You know what Mrs. Williams told me on my first day of violin lessons? Music doesn't care about your last name. She was right. And these girls don't care that I'm a Morrison or not. They only need someone to love and protect them. The sound of childish laughter drifted from the hallway. Sarah must have woken up. Richard looked toward the sound, something in his expression softening almost imperceptibly. You're throwing your legacy away, he said, but his voice had lost some of its harshness. Everything I built. I'm not throwing anything away, Jack replied gently. I'm choosing a different legacy, one that isn't measured in dollars or square footage. The bedroom door opened, and Sarah ran into the kitchen, dragging her teddy bear. She stopped when she saw Richard, hiding partly behind Emily. Good morning, little one, Jack smiled, opening his arms. Sarah ran to him immediately, letting him pick her up. This is my father. Your tie is pretty, Sarah said shyly, making Richard blink in surprise. Thank you, he replied automatically, observing how his son, his heir, the future of the Morrison family, held the girl with natural paternal affection. Dad, Jack said softly, I know this isn't what you planned for me, but look at them, really look. They're two incredible kids who have already lost too much, and now— His voice broke slightly. Now they're about to lose their grandma, too. I can't abandon them. I won't. Richard Morrison was known in the business world for his ability to read people, to identify strengths and weaknesses. And what he saw now in his son was not weakness. It was a determination he had never witnessed before. You're really going to do this? It wasn't a question. Give up everything. I'm not giving up anything, Jack corrected. I'm gaining a family. The silence that followed was broken by Jack's phone ringing. It was the hospital. Yes, he answered, still holding Sarah. His face went pale as he listened. I understand. We're on our way. Grandma? Emily asked immediately, her voice trembling. She's having a rough day, Jack answered carefully. The doctors think it's best if we go see her now. Is she going to die? Sarah asked, tears already spilling down her round cheeks. Oh, sweetheart, Jack hugged her tighter. Your grandma is very strong, but yes, she's very sick. Richard observed the scene with a complex expression. John— Dad, Jack cut him off, putting Sarah down gently. I need to get them to the hospital. You can walk out and cut me off financially, or you can stay and meet your new family. It's your choice." He turned to the girls. "Let's get dressed quickly. Grandma's waiting." While the girls rushed to their rooms, Richard Morrison remained motionless in the kitchen, looking at the drawings on the fridge, a family of 4, with a violin hovering above them like a guiding star. "You really think you can do this?" he finally asked. "Raise 2 kids on your own." "I'm not alone," Jack replied, picking up the violin with the compass rose. "I have music, I have love, and—" He looked meaningfully at his father. "Maybe, if you allow it, I can have an even bigger family than I ever imagined." Richard adjusted his expensive tie, a gesture Jack recognized as a sign of nervousness since childhood. "I'm going to need time to process all of this." "I understand," Jack smiled slightly. "But don't take too long. Your granddaughters need a grandfather." The girls came back, dressed and ready, Emily holding a folder of sheet music. "Are we going to play for Grandma today?" she asked hopefully. "Of course we are," Jack replied, grabbing the car keys. "And music always makes her feel better." Richard watched as his son got the girls organized, double-checking they had everything they needed, adjusting Sarah's scarf, praising the hairstyle Emily had done on her own. It was a side of John, no, of Jack, he had never witnessed before. "Son," he called as they reached the door. "Tyuston, you'll need a good attorney for the guardianship process." Jack turned at Seo, surprised. "Dad?" "Morrison and Associates has the best lawyers on the East Coast," Richard continued, as though discussing a business deal. I can make some calls." A small smile appeared on Jack's face. "Thank you, Dad." Richard nodded stiffly, then shocked everyone by crouching to the girl's eye level. "It was nice to meet you, Emily and Sarah. Maybe we can get to know each other better soon." Sarah, following her naturally affectionate nature, hugged the man's legs. "Your tie really is very pretty," she said solemnly. Something like a smile flickered briefly across Richard Morrison's face. On the way to the hospital, Jack couldn't help thinking about the strange turns life takes. A month ago, he had been adrift in a sea of expectations and obligations. He had a clear purpose, an unconditional love for 2 small orphans, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance to reconcile both sides of his life. Emily silently practiced her fingerings, preparing to play for her grandmother. Sarah slept in the back seat, clutching her teddy bear tightly. And somewhere in the city, Richard Morrison was beginning to understand that some fortunes can't be measured in dollars. The violin with the compass rose lay on the back seat, silent but present, as always. Music really could guide them through any storm, even through the storms of the heart. Morning came quietly and grey at Massachusetts General Hospital. Jack looked out the window of room 507 as the city slowly woke up. The first daylight fighting its way through the heavy clouds that promised rain. The rhythmic sound of the heart monitor had become a constant presence in recent days, its weaker and weaker beeping echoing the battle Mrs. Williams was losing. Emily slept curled up in a chair in the corner, protecting her grandmother's violin in her lap like a talisman. Sarah had finally fallen asleep in the bed beside Mrs. Williams, her small hand still tightly clasped around her grandmother's. The last 72 hours had been an emotional roller coaster, as pneumonia developed quickly, as a complication of her already advanced cancer. Jack allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, letting the tears he'd held back slip silently down his face. How could he explain to 2 children who'd already lost so much that they might have to say goodbye once again? How could he prepare them for another loss? "Is the sun coming up?" Mrs. Williams' weak voice startled him. He turned quickly, wiping his face. She was awake, her blue eyes, Sarah's eyes, still shining despite the illness. "Yes," he answered softly, moving closer to the bed. "Want me to open the curtains more?" "Please," she whispered. "I've always loved sunrise. Each day is a new chance to make music." Jack drew the curtains back, letting more light into the room. Mrs. Williams gazed at her sleeping granddaughters, a faint but loving smile on her pale lips. "They're so strong," she murmured, "stronger than they realize." "Like their grandmother," Jack replied, sitting down in the chair beside her. "Mrs." Williams tried to laugh, but the sound turned into a dry cough. Jack quickly offered her water, helping her drink a few sips. "Jack," she said, once she'd caught her breath, "I need you to promise me some things." "Mrs. Williams, don't—" "Please," she insisted, her hand trembling as she held his. "We don't have much time, and there's so much I need to say." Jack nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Mrs. Williams took a deep breath, each word obviously costing her tremendous effort. "Emily," she began, looking toward her older granddaughter. "She carries so much responsibility on those small shoulders, always trying to be strong for everyone. Promise me you'll let her be a child sometimes. Teach her it's okay to cry, to be angry, to be imperfect." "I promise," Jack said, his voice choked with emotion. "And Sarah," she went on, stroking her younger granddaughter's hair. "My little dreamer, she feels everything so deeply. The world can be so frightening at times. Promise you'll protect her innocence, but also teach her to be strong." "With my life," he vowed. Mrs. Williams gave a faint smile. "You know, when Margaret and John died, I thought my world had ended. But these little ones, they gave me a reason to keep going, and now you—" "I always wondered," Jack said softly, "why you never reached out to me. When you needed help." She closed her eyes briefly. "You had your own life and your own battles to fight, and after the accident, well, the girls needed stability. I couldn't risk more changes in their lives." "Still," Jack insisted, "if I had known—" "Oh dear," she smiled, that smile that had brightened so many of his childhood lessons. "You were always special, you know. From that very first lesson, when you walked in all formal in your little suit, trying to look like the perfect Morrison heir. But your eyes always revealed your true heart." The memory hit Jack with full force. His first violin lesson at age 8. He had been so nervous, so determined not to disappoint his father. "Music doesn't care about your last name, dear Mrs. Williams had said, placing a violin in his hands for the first time. "It only cares about what's in your heart. You changed my life that day," he confessed. "It was the first time anyone saw me just as Jack." "And that's why," she breathed deeply, fighting another wave of coughing, "that's why I know you'll take good care of them. Because your heart has always been bigger than your last name." Emily stirred in the chair, her green eyes opening slowly. Seeing her grandmother awake, she practically jumped out of the seat. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, rushing to the bed. The movement woke Sarah, who blinked sleepily. "My little stars," Mrs. Williams smiled, her voice weaker. "How about a little music to start the day?" Emily immediately picked up the violin, positioning it the way her grandmother had taught. Sarah scooted closer on the bed, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but shining with anticipation. The first notes of Ave Maria filled the room, each note steeped in love and devotion. Mrs. Williams closed her eyes, letting the music envelop her like a hug. "Mom used to play that song to help us sleep," Sarah commented softly. "Grandma says it was her favorite." "It was," Mrs. Williams confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret, your mother, she had a special gift." Music flowed through her like water. Emily kept playing, but Jack noticed silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Mrs. Williams noticed too. "Emily, dear," she called, "come here a moment." The girl lowered the violin, stepping up to the bed. Mrs. Williams touched her face with trembling fingers, wiping away her tears. "You have the same gift she did, you know. But more important than that, you have the same heart. Strong, kind, full of music." A cough interrupted her, more violent this time. Jack moved quickly to help her, but she made a gesture for him to wait. When she regained her breath, she continued, "I want you to promise me something, Emily. Promise you'll keep playing no matter what happens. Music. Music will always guide you through life's storms." "I promise, Grandma," Emily replied solemnly. "And you, my little Sarah," Mrs. Williams turned to her younger granddaughter, "promise you'll keep that heart so full of love and dreams. The world needs more light like yours." Sarah hugged her grandmother gently. "I promise, Grandma. But you have to promise something too." "What is it, my love?" "Promise you'll send us signs from heaven, like shooting stars or rainbows, so we know you're okay." Mrs. Williams fought back tears. "Oh, my little angel, I'll do even better. Whenever you hear music, whenever your hearts fill with melody, I'll be there. In every note, every chord." Another coughing fit interrupted her, this one worse than before. Jack noticed with alarm the blood spots on the handkerchief she used. "Girls," he called gently, "how about going to get some breakfast? Your grandma needs a bit of rest." "No." Sarah clung to her grandmother. "I don't want to go." "It's okay," Mrs. Williams managed. "I just need to close my eyes for a moment." Emily, always more perceptive, took her sister's hand. "Come on, Sarah. Grandma needs to sleep so she can get strong again. We can bring her hot chocolate later." Mrs. Williams smiled faintly, her eyes already closing from exhaustion. "My little ones, and so wise." When the girls left with a nurse who offered to take them to the cafeteria, Mrs. Williams opened her eyes again, meeting Jack's. "Not much time left," she said simply. "I know," he replied, holding her hand. "The doctors, they said the pneumonia is spreading fast." "Jack," she squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "You know what you have to do, right? When I'm gone." "I'll take care of them," he promised. "I've already started the paperwork for guardianship. My father, he's helping, believe it or not. He's hired the best lawyers. Richard Morrison," she smiled weakly. "Always so determined to control everything, but deep down, he has a good heart. Like his son. He's changed since he met the girls. I guess they have that effect on people." "They have the gift of finding the best in everyone," Mrs. Williams agreed. "Like their mother, Margaret always saw beauty in everything." Her voice trailed off, a pained expression crossing her face. "Mrs. Williams." "I'm fine," she breathed. Just tired." Jack, the violin, "We'll stay with the girls, of course. It's not just an instrument," she insisted. "It's our story, our heritage, the compass rose." "We'll guide them through any storm," Jack finished softly. "I know, and I promise I'll keep music alive in their lives." Mrs. Williams smiled, her eyes drifting shut again. "You're a good man, Jack Morrison. I've always known, and ever since that first day, that there was music in your heart." Her words grew weaker, her breathing more labored. Jack pressed the nurse's call button. "Rest," he whispered. "The girls will be here when you wake up." But something in his heart told him Mrs. Williams would not wake again. Not in this world, at least. The next hours were a blur of medical interventions and precious moments. The girls returned, and Emily played more music, everything her grandmother had taught her. Sarah sang along, her childish voice mingling with the violin's notes. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to set and bathe the room in golden light, Mrs. Betty Williams left this world. Emily was playing Amazing Grace, her mother's favorite hymn. Sarah was snuggled against her grandmother's side, humming softly. Jack held her other hand. There was no drama, no struggle, just one last gentle breath, one final smile, and then silence. The heart monitor let out its final beep at the exact moment Emily bowed the last note. "Grandma," Sarah called softly. "Grandma, wake up." Emily lowered the violin, her hands trembling. Jack wrapped them both in his arms as the doctors and nurses rushed in. "She's not suffering anymore," he whispered, feeling their tears dampen his shirt. "She's at peace now." The following hours were a whirlwind of necessary procedures and tough decisions. Jack kept the girls close, shielding them from the gentle yet efficient chaos that follows a loved one's passing. Richard Morrison arrived at the hospital shortly after, surprising everyone. "The girls shouldn't stay here," he said simply. "I'll take them for some ice cream while you handle what needs to be done." Jack nodded, grateful for the unexpected help. "Emily, Sarah, want to go with Grandpa Richard." The girls looked at the man who, just a few weeks ago, had been a stranger, but something in his posture, usually so rigid, had softened. "You can pick any flavor you like," Richard offered, his voice gentle in a way Jack rarely heard. Sarah took his hand without hesitation. Emily hesitated a moment longer, looking back at Jack. "Will everything be okay?" she asked. "Yes," he promised, "and I'll be home when you get back." Watching his father walk away with the girls, Jack felt a wave of gratitude. Music really did have the power to transform hearts, even the seemingly inflexible heart of Richard Morrison. Later that night, back at the apartment, Sarah finally fell asleep after crying until she had no tears left. Emily sat at the piano, her fingers pressing the keys soundlessly. "She's really gone, isn't she?" she asked when Jack sat beside her. "Yes, sweetheart," he answered honestly. "But you know what never goes away. All the love she had for you. All the lessons, all the stories, all the memories." Emily leaned against him, allowing herself to be just a 5-year-old who had lost her last connection to her parents. "Jack," she said after a long silence, "what happens now?" "Well," he took a deep breath, "tomorrow we'll start all the legal steps for me to officially become your guardian. There will be a social worker who'll visit us, and she'll ask a lot of questions to make sure you'll be safe and happy with me. It might feel a little scary at first, but I promise I'll be right there with you." Emily nodded, her fingers still brushing silently over the piano keys. What if they won't let us stay with you?" "That won't happen," Jack assured, though his heart tightened at the possibility. "Your grandpa Richard hired the best lawyers, and more importantly, we have something no one can deny. We're a family. A family that chose each other through music and love." Sarah shifted in her sleep on the sofa, murmuring something about violins and angels. Emily looked at her sister with protective eyes. "Grandma said music would guide us," she murmured, picking up the violin with the compass rose. "And it will," Jack smiled gently, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Want to play one last song before bed?" Emily positioned the violin the way her grandmother taught, and the soft notes of Amazing Grace filled the apartment once more. This time, though, the melody carried not just sadness, but also hope. Hope for a new beginning, for a family rebuilt by love and music. The violin with the compass rose shone gently under the lamplight. Its graceful curves a reminder that even on the darkest nights, music will find a way to guide lost hearts back home. "So about Emily, what do you like most about living with Jack?" The question from social worker Claire Matthews hung in the living room air while Emily continued to play softly on her grandmother's violin. It was the 5th visit in 3 weeks, and Jack could feel the girl's nervousness through the slightly unsteady notes of Moonlight Sonata. "He teaches me about music," Emily finally replied, lowering the instrument, "like Grandma did. But also—" She hesitated, glancing at Jack for reassurance. "He lets me just be a kid sometimes. When I'm sad or angry." Claire jotted down a few notes in her folder, her perceptive eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses taking in every interaction. Sarah, who had been coloring on the rug, looked up. "And he makes bear-shaped pancakes," she exclaimed, abandoning her colored pencils to run to Jack. "And he never gets mad if I mess up the piano notes, and he tells different bedtime stories every night, and—" "Sarah," Jack chuckled, picking her up, "let Mrs. Matthews ask her questions, all right?" The social worker smiled, but Jack noticed how her eyes took in every detail of the apartment, the neatly arranged sheet music on the piano, the girls' drawings on the fridge, the violin with the compass rose now displayed on a specially built shelf. "Mr. Morrison," she began, her tone professional but not unkind, "can you tell me about your daily routine with the girls?" Jack adjusted Sarah on his lap. "I wake up at 6 to make breakfast. Emily usually gets up soon after. She likes practicing violin in the morning. Says that's when her grandma used to practice. Sarah sleeps in a bit more. Because I stay up late dreaming of little music angels," Sarah cut in, causing Claire to smile. "After breakfast," Jack continued, "we do homeschooling for now. The child psychologist, Dr. Rachel, suggested waiting a bit before enrolling them in regular school to give them time to process their grief. Emily is particularly good at math, and Sarah has a natural gift for art. And music," Emily quickly added. "Sarah can already play almost all of Für Elise on the piano." Claire made more notes. "And what about emotional support? How do you handle the difficult moments?" Jack took a deep breath, recalling the previous night. Sarah had woken up crying, calling for her grandma. Instead of trying to force her back to bed immediately, he'd taken her to the piano. "Sometimes," he replied, "when the pain of missing her is too much, we make music. Other times, we just cry together." Mrs. Williams. She taught us there's no shame in feeling or being vulnerable. "Music doesn't judge our tears, dear," his old teacher's voice echoed in his memory. "It transforms them into something beautiful." "Jack?" Emily's voice brought him back to the present. She'd come closer, still holding the violin like a shield. "Mrs. Matthews," the girl began, her voice small but determined, "I know you need to make sure we're okay, that Jack can take care of us. But—" She looked over at her sister, still in Jack's lap. "We've already lost so many people. Please don't let them take him away too." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Sarah sniffing, pressing her face into Jack's chest. Claire slowly closed her folder. "Emily, Sarah, you both know there's a court hearing tomorrow, right?" The girls nodded. "The judge will ask a lot of questions, like I did. He needs to be sure this is the best situation for you. Do you understand?" "But we already know it is," Sarah protested. "Jack is our family now. He promised, and Jack always keeps his promises." Claire stood up, adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Morrison, may I speak to you in private?" In the kitchen, while the girls returned to their activities in the living room, Claire got straight to the point. "Do you realize how unusual this situation is? A single 28-year-old man with no prior experience with children, seeking custody of two girls who aren't biologically related to him." "I do," Jack answered frankly, "but I also realize how unusual the love we've built is, the bond we share through music, through Mrs. Williams's memory." "Jack," she interrupted gently, "I'm not questioning the love. It's evident in every interaction I've observed, but the system has protocols, precedents. Are they more important than the emotional well-being of two kids who've already lost so much?" Claire sighed. "Judge Palmer is known to be traditional in his rulings. He'll want to see stability, structure, a concrete plan for the future. And that's exactly what we have." A new voice joined the conversation. Richard Morrison stood at the kitchen door, his immaculate suit contrasting with the cozy simplicity of the space. "Dad?" Jack frowned. "I didn't know you were coming today." "We need to discuss some details about tomorrow," Richard replied, then turned to Claire. "Mrs. Matthews, I presume. Richard Morrison, the petitioner's father." Claire shook the hand he offered. "Mr. Morrison, your presence here is interesting, considering previous reports of your initial opposition to this arrangement." Richard seemed visibly uncomfortable. "People can change, Mrs. Matthews. Sometimes we just need the right music to open our hearts." As if to illustrate his point, the sound of the violin came from the living room. Emily was practicing Ave Maria, her mother's favorite hymn. Sarah quickly joined in with her childish singing. "Grandpa!" The music stopped abruptly when Sarah noticed Richard running to hug his legs. To Jack's surprise, his father smiled, a genuine smile he rarely showed in public. "I brought something for you," Richard announced, pulling an envelope from his inner pocket. "Preliminary plans for the Betty Williams School of Music." Emily approached curiously, still holding the violin. "A music school?" "With scholarships for talented children," Richard explained, spreading architectural drawings on the kitchen table. "A proper legacy for your grandma, don't you think?" Claire watched with professional interest. "Mr. Morrison, Richard, this project, is it serious?" "Morrison Real Estate never does anything halfway, my Mrs. Matthews," he replied, his business tone softened by Sarah's presence at his side. "We already have the property, preliminary approvals, and a substantial fund for scholarships." "And Jack will help?" Emily asked, her green eyes studying the drawings. "In fact," Richard cleared his throat, "I was hoping he would agree to head the entire project, a new branch of our social responsibility division focused on arts and education." Jack looked at his father, surprised. "Dad, before you say anything," Richard interrupted, "this isn't charity or manipulation. It's a genuine attempt to do the right thing, to honor Betty Williams's legacy and," he hesitated, "to be the kind of father and grandfather I should have been a long time ago." Claire closed her notebook. "Well, this certainly adds a new element to the financial stability equation, but Judge Palmer will still want—" The doorbell rang again, cutting her off. Jack opened it to find Marcus Chen from Silicon Valley Tech Ventures, immaculate in his own Italian suit. "Mr. Morrison," he smiled, extending his hand, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Jack felt his stomach tighten. He knew Marcus Chen by reputation. He was Silicon Valley's most respected headhunter. Actually, he began, but Chen had already stepped inside, handing out business cards. Ladies and gentlemen, he said efficiently, I've come in person because this is a unique opportunity. Silicon Valley Tech Ventures, Director of Operations, a starting salary in the 7 figures, full benefits, including... No! Emily's voice cut through the presentation like a sharp blade. Everyone turned to look at the 5-year-old who now clutched the violin like armor. Excuse me? Chen blinked, clearly not used to being interrupted. Jack isn't leaving, Emily stated, tears shining in her eyes. He promised. Sarah ran to hug Jack's legs. You promised, she echoed, her voice quivering. Chen looked puzzled. Mr. Morrison, surely we can discuss arrangements for... There's nothing to discuss, Jack interrupted gently, picking Sarah up. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Chen, but my life, my family is here. Perhaps we should save this discussion for tomorrow, Claire suggested diplomatically. Judge Palmer will want to know about all available options. The next morning was grey and cold, the kind of day Mrs. Williams used to say was perfect for music, because the melody brings color to the world, she would explain. The waiting area of the Boston family court was surprisingly full. Mrs. Martinez was there, along with several neighbors. The doctors and nurses who had cared for Mrs. Williams filled an entire row. Even some of her former students had shown up, their instruments carefully tucked in cases under the benches. Emily practiced imaginary fingerings, dressed in her best blue dress, the same color her mother had worn during her last symphony performance. Sarah dozed on Jack's lap, her teddy bear never far away. Case number 2547, petition for custody of Emily and Sarah Williams. The bailiff's voice echoed through the room, and Jack felt his heart race. The next few hours would determine not just his future, but also that of the 2 little souls who had already lost so much. Judge Palmer was exactly as Claire had described. Stern, traditional. His reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose as he scanned the documents before him. Before we begin, he announced, I want to establish some facts. Mr. Morrison, you are requesting legal custody of Emily and Sarah Williams, correct? Yes, Your Honor. You have no blood relation to the children, nor any prior experience raising children, correct? No, Your Honor, but... And you recently abandoned your position in the family company to devote yourself to this arrangement. Jack took a deep breath. Yes, Your Honor. But if I may explain, Mrs. Matthews, the judge cut him off. Your report, please. Claire stood, adjusting her glasses. Your Honor, over the past 3 weeks, I've conducted intensive visits to Mr. Morrison's home with the girls. What I found was extraordinary. She described in detail the interactions she had witnessed, the music lessons, the open discussions of their feelings, how Jack had completely adapted his life to meet the girls' needs. But most impressive, she went on, is the community support Mrs. Martinez, she gestured to the neighbor, helps with the girls when needed. The doctors who cared for Mrs. Williams continue to monitor the children's well-being, and the Morrison family, she glanced at Richard, is committed to an ambitious project honoring Betty Williams' legacy. That was when Marcus Chen stood up. Your Honor, if I may? The judge nodded, and Chen formally presented the Silicon Valley Tech Ventures proposal. Jack felt Emily grip his hand tightly as the astronomical salary, benefits, and opportunities were mentioned. It's quite an offer, the judge commented. Mr. Morrison? Jack rose slowly, still holding Emily's hand. Your Honor, in the past few weeks I've learned something no business school could ever teach me. I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in digits or job titles. He picked up the violin with the compass rose that Emily had brought. This instrument has a story. It belonged to the girl's grandmother, and before her, their great-grandmother, Mrs. Williams, used to say that music guides us through any storm. She taught me this when I was 8, a frightened boy trying to live up to the Morrison name. And now, the judge prompted, now I'm teaching her granddaughters that family isn't just blood, it's commitment, love. He smiled at Emily and Sarah. It's the music we make together. Then something unexpected happened. Emily let go of Jack's hand and walked to the center of the room, carrying the violin. Your Honor, she said, her small but clear voice filling the courtroom, may I play something? The judge looked surprised but nodded. Emily positioned the violin exactly as her grandmother had taught her, her tiny fingers finding the strings with precision. For a moment, the entire courtroom held its breath. The first notes of Amazing Grace filled the room, each note charged with emotion. Sarah, recognizing the melody, set down her teddy bear and walked over to her sister, joining in with her childlike singing. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Jack watched with silent tears streaming down his face as the girls made their own plea, in the best way they knew, through music. In the front row, Richard Morrison discreetly wiped his eyes. When the final note faded, Emily lowered the violin and looked directly at the judge. "That was our mom's favorite song," she said. "Grandma taught us that when we play it, they're still with us, Mom, Dad, and now Grandma too." Her voice trembled. "Jack, he understands that. He knows we need music so we don't forget who we are." Sarah grabbed her sister's hand. "And he's part of our music now," she added simply. A profound silence filled the courtroom. Judge Palmer removed his glasses, wiping them methodically as if trying to absorb what he had just witnessed. "Mrs. Matthews," he finally said, "your final thoughts." Claire stood, her voice thick with barely restrained emotion. "Your Honor, when I began evaluating this case, I was looking for evidence of stability and capability. What I found was something far rarer: unconditional love and genuine commitment. During my visits, I witnessed moments no report can truly capture." She described how she'd found Jack teaching Sarah piano at 3 in the morning after a nightmare, how Emily practiced violin every morning determined to honor her family's legacy, how music had become their language of healing. "Furthermore," she continued, "the entire community has rallied to support them. Mrs. Martinez helps with the girls. The doctors who cared for Mrs. Williams continue to monitor their well-being. And now," she glanced at Richard, "even the Morrison family is united in this cause." Marcus Chen stood again. "Your Honor, our offer—" "You can keep your offer," Richard Morrison interrupted him, surprising everyone. "My son already has a job, building Betty Williams's legacy through this new music school, a job that allows him to stay here with his family." The judge watched the scene for a long moment. Jack hugged the girls, who had returned to his side, feeling their small hearts pounding against his chest. "This is an unprecedented case," the judge began. "We have a non-traditional custody petitioner with no prior parenting experience who left a promising career." He paused, looking at Emily and Sarah. "But we also have 2 extraordinary children who have suffered immense losses and who have clearly found not just stability, but real love and understanding." He stood. "I will retire to deliberate. We'll reconvene in an hour." As the courtroom emptied, Jack stayed seated, holding Emily and Sarah close. Mrs. Martinez approached with cups of tea for everyone. The doctors and nurses offered words of encouragement. Richard Morrison remained in the front row, his restless hands betraying his anxiety. "Jack?" Emily asked quietly. "What if—" "Shh," he gently hushed her. "Remember what your grandma used to say. Music guides us through every storm." Sarah took the violin, tracing the compass rose with her small fingers. "Grandma's helping us from heaven," she declared with the certainty only a child can have. The next hour would be the longest of their lives, but for the first time since the process began, Jack felt true hope. Because music and love always finds a way. The violin with the compass rose lay silently in its case, witnessing a family that came together not by blood, but through the notes of a melody that began long ago in a music room, where a rich boy learned that some fortunes can't be measured in dollars. The bailiff announced Judge Palmer's return, and everyone in the room stood. Emily clutched Jack's hand tightly, while Sarah hugged her teddy bear, her blue eyes fixed on the imposing figure of the judge. That was when the courtroom doors swung open. Elizabeth Morrison, who hadn't been seen in public since the start of the proceedings, hurried inside. Her usually composed face showed clear signs of emotion. "I apologize, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking. "But there's something I need to say before you make your decision." Judge Palmer regarded the newcomer with interest. "Mrs. Morrison?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'm the petitioner's mother." She stopped next to Richard. "And a woman who needs to correct her mistakes." Jack watched his mother in surprise. Elizabeth Morrison had always been the embodiment of social perfection. Seeing her like this, emotionally exposed, was unprecedented. When Jack was young, she began, I let societal expectations dictate every aspect of his life. When he showed interest in music, I saw it as a distraction. When Mrs. Williams began nurturing his passion for art, She hesitated. I helped end the lessons. Emily glanced at Jack, who couldn't take his eyes off his mother. But now, seeing my son with these girls, witnessing the love they've built through music, I realize I was wrong all along. Richard placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, a surprisingly public display of affection for the usually reserved couple. Sarah, led by her tender heart, ran up to Elizabeth. Will you be our grandma too? She asked innocently. The courtroom watched in silence as Elizabeth knelt to hug the little girl, tears streaming freely down her face. If you'll have me, my love, Richard cleared his throat, straightening his tie. Your Honor, if I may. When the judge nodded, he continued. I spent my life building an empire. Every decision focused on the Morrison legacy. But seeing Jack with Emily and Sarah, watching how he's transformed pain into music, loss into love, I've realized the true legacy is being built right now. Marcus Chen stood up again. The Silicon Valley offer is unnecessary, Jack interrupted gently. My place is here, too, with my girls, with our music. In fact, Richard added, taking out a folder of documents, Jack's going to be quite busy. Your Honor, I present documentation for the Betty Williams Foundation. The judge examined the papers with interest. As Richard explained, the foundation will identify and support talented children in vulnerable situations, providing music education and family support. The first project will be the Betty Williams School of Music. And the funding? The judge asked. I'm converting my inheritance for the project, Jack replied. And we'll match every cent, Elizabeth added, still holding Sarah. It's time the Morrison money served a greater purpose. Emily picked up her violin. Your Honor, she said, Grandma used to say that music heals broken hearts. Jack didn't just give us a home, he kept our music alive. The judge removed his glasses, wiping them carefully. In 30 years on the family court bench, I've rarely seen a case so extraordinary. What I've witnessed today, he smiled faintly, proves Mrs. Williams was right about the power of music. Sarah returned to Jack, taking his hand. Emily took his other, holding her grandmother's violin securely in her arm. It is the decision of this court, the judge announced, to grant full and permanent custody of Emily and Sarah Williams to Mr. Jack Morrison. The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Martinez openly wept. The doctors and nurses smiled through tears. In the center of it all, Jack held his daughters while his parents joined them in an embrace long overdue. One last thing, Emily said. Positioning the violin, she began to play Amazing Grace. Sarah added her crystal-clear voice to the melody, and to everyone's surprise, Elizabeth joined in as well, her trained voice harmonizing perfectly with her granddaughter. 6 months later, the auditorium at the Betty Williams School of Music was packed for its first benefit recital. Emily and Sarah, wearing complementary shades of blue, got ready on stage. Ready? Jack asked, adjusting the microphone. Emily smiled, holding her grandmother's violin. Sarah nodded, seated at the special piano Richard had imported. In the front row, Elizabeth and Richard watched proudly. The entire community was there, neighbors, doctors, nurses, former students of Mrs. Williams, all witnesses to the miracle a small compass rose engraved on a violin had made possible. Good evening, Emily spoke into the microphone. This song is special to our family. Our mom used to play it when we were babies. Our grandma taught us its notes, and now, she looked at Jack, our dad helps us keep it alive. Sarah began the chords of Amazing Grace on the piano. Emily joined in with the violin, and a new harmony that Jack had helped create emerged, weaving together beloved themes of their family. The foundation had already identified its first scholarship recipients, 2 sisters from a local shelter who showed a talent for the cello. Soon, more children would discover the transformative power of music, and more families would be touched by the magic that had changed the Morrisons. The violin with the compass rose sang in Emily's hands, each note a fulfilled promise, each chord a bridge between past and future. And in that moment, Jack was certain Mrs. Williams was smiling, proud of how her little family had found their way through the storm, guided by the music she loved so much. Because some fortunes can't be measured in dollars. Some inheritances are passed along through musical notes, through unconditional love, through small compass roses that guide us to our true home. And as the last note resonated through the auditorium, Jack knew this was not an ending. It was merely the first movement of a larger symphony, a symphony of love, hope, and redemption, played on the violin that had started it all.